Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
What I find fascinating with Meta is that they renamed the entire company for something that they've now abandoned.
Maybe we can discuss that at the beginning.
We can do. I mean, we are recording. If you want to, I'll say very quickly, hello everybody. Welcome to the weekly download. Today I'm joined by James. James, if you'd like to introduce yourself, aside from what else is there about you apart from your clear take on Meta as a business?
What else is it? I don't know what you're talking about, Tom. Hello, I'm James. I'm co-founder at Big Games Machine, and yes, I do like Star Wars. You can't even see my Stormtrooper helmet here, Tom. Look, it's my pride
get it
and
out
joy.
there. Look at that. That's like, because you've not been on this edition of the podcast yet, we've got that now as your proof that you are adequately nerdy.
Yeah. Well, you can't
come into the fold.
You can't see all my Lego up here. I've got my pride and joy, my Rivendell set that I finished last week after 6 months.
That we've never stopped hearing about. But why not?
And then,
you would have known a few weeks ago. Alex and I had our. Mine's eternally behind me, so I just fully embrace the. You hide yours. Your background is more tasteful, perhaps a bit.
No,
more
it's practicality. I can almost touch the wall when I reach out here behind me. It's just getting a shelf and filling it with Lego. I'm thinking what I might do is buy. Actually, you've just sparked.
And live on the podcast, we've had I think I
actually might put a shelf in, put my Lego on there. You've actually inspired me, Tom. You inspire me on a daily basis, but this is today's inspiration.
Next time you're on, you're going to have there's going to be some DIY going on, and we'll have a shelf behind you. Now,
we'll see.
Unfortunately, I'll cut the DIY chat short, because I'm very keen to get into today's episode. I think we've got some, as always, I think we always have some great stories, but this week we've got a few really interesting bits. We're looking at Valve, we're looking at Highguard, which obviously launched this week, and then we're also, once again, I think Ubisoft is our most covered topic so far since we started this podcast. We're doing it again. We did it last week. It's very hard to avoid talking about Ubisoft, but that's a little look at what's to come. So we'll see you in a moment, where we'll get started on our first story of the day. So we're going to start today's episode by taking a look at Valve, Steam, and the United Kingdom. What do those three things not have in common, but what are they all sharing? Well, there's now a UK lawsuit that Valve are facing, in the UK, of course, for a total of £650 million. That's a collective action lawsuit on behalf of 14 million UK gamers who have used Steam since 2018, all of which could receive a payout. Now, I can hear you all asking, and I know you're going to be asking, James, but what's this lawsuit about? Well, one of the allegations here is that Valve is using its quote-unquote market dominance to keep game prices artificially high and force publishers to sign terms that essentially stop them from selling games for cheaper on other platforms. So if this does come about, we've funded your shelves. If you've ever bought a game on Steam, perhaps is a way to look at it. But James, do you have any thoughts on this? Because this is big numbers, big story. I think we've seen similar things in the past, but this one looks like it could be a real sticking point for Valve potentially.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things spring to mind. I mean, one is it's different but similar. I mean, obviously, you've still got the whole thing going on between Epic and Apple and Google, and the theme here is really about monopoly, about who holds, who's the gatekeeper to the pockets of the end consumer. And obviously, Steam is an £800 gorilla. Obviously, the Epic have created their own store. I don't know off the cuff relatively what sales are, but I bet it's nothing like Steam. I think we know from our own work that we do with launching games, Tom, that almost everything now is turned into wish lists. People obsessively wanting to work out, if I invest this, how many wish lists is it going to become? So Steam's dominance is enormous. And then you think about, oh my God, there's the console coming out in the next few months, which will lock it in even more into their own ecosystem. So I think there's a bigger picture here, obviously, about just the dominance of stores, monopoly on pricing. I think also it's just an interesting question because you've got other things that are bubbling around pricing of games. You've obviously got things around grey markets, around pricing in different territories, people reselling keys in different places, which arguably could be caused by this because the publishers can't set more favorable pricing. And so that may fuel the grey market. But yeah, that was a fairly long answer, but just a few things.
I think a good answer, though. I think there's some really valid points here. I mean, you're speaking about the ecosystem. One of the other things, one of the other elements within this lawsuit is this idea that if you buy a game on Steam, if you then in the future, if there's DLC, if there's expansions, if there's in-game microtransactions or things that you can buy within the game, if you buy that game on Steam initially, there's no way for you to access that stuff outside of Steam. Again, it might be cheaper somewhere else, but you can't necessarily get to that outside of that ecosystem which you've discussed. And I think that's the really big point here, is that I think not necessarily traditionally, but I think there's this idea that the PC marketplace is very open in comparison to consoles, which are, if you've got a Nintendo system, you buy from digitally, you buy from the eShop or you don't buy. Same with Sony, same with Xbox. Whereas with PC, the dream and the idea is that within reason, you can buy from anywhere. Whereas, as you said, because Steam now has such a level of dominance, they have this ability to really go to people and say, well, if you don't like our terms, if you don't like how we go about things, well, you don't have to be on Steam. But I can't imagine any developer is going to take that option because they're losing out on so much by not being on Steam.
Yeah, I think that it leads to interesting questions around sort of, digital ownership and what you are or aren't allowed to do from other people when you've paid them for the content.
Yeah. And again, something you've brought up, because Steam does have that monopoly, they do have the ability to decide those things. Something else with this suit is the 30% commission fee. That's a big thing that's come up as a part of this, which of course Valve takes from every sale. That's something that's mentioned and presented in a way that it's an excessive fee. This is another cost that the consumer ends up taking on because the developer can't take that loss. Now, to me, I think the challenging of that in particular is really interesting because as far as I understand, it might not be 30% in every case, but pretty much above the board. Across the board, every digital marketplace has this commission fee in place, whether it's 20, 25, 30%. And in a situation where this suit is successful and that part of it is successful as well, all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, long term, is there a possibility that other storefronts, that other platform holders are going to have to deal with the same thing, where people are turning around and saying, well, you can't charge this 30% fee. This is ridiculous. Now, that's all hypothetical because we don't know. I mean, again, it's worth noting a similar action case was filed in the US a few years ago, and that's still ongoing. So there's not been any conclusion to that. So we don't have that to inform us of how this might go.
I mean, the beauty of something like this, for someone like, a company like Valve that has very deep pockets, as witnessed by Gabe's enormous mega yacht. Or is it mega yachts? I think he's got more than one, hasn't he? He's got a fleet. They can afford the best lawyers that can just keep this mired in the courts for years, and they can really drag it out and not have to face it. And then there'll be appeals and counter appeals and counters. Unless something's very definitively thrown out, then they can take their sweet time in dragging this out for as long as they want.
I feel like with what you've just said, where we'll end this one then is if anyone's expecting to, if any of those 14 million people are expecting to be getting any money anytime soon,
it won't be.
I wouldn't count on it.
And if you do, maybe it'll go into your pension fund and you'll probably be drawing your pension by that time in any case. So I'll leave it there.
Exactly. I think that's a good place to end it. Right, we'll be back in a second. And we're back with our second story of the day. And this one feels we're always covering very time-sensitive things and what's been popping up in the last few days. But this one, I know, James, this kind of came as a personal request from you when we spoke earlier, and you were very much wanting to touch on this. And we're going to look at the controversial, I'll say in air quotes, launch of Wildlight Entertainment's Highguard. For some quick background and context on this, if you're not aware, I think you should be. This has been everywhere, but Highguard launched a few days ago, currently sat on a mostly negative rating on Steam. At the time of recording, that's with around 20,000 reviews. The player count at launch on Steam peaked at just under 100,000. 2 days later, it's under 7,000. My question to you then, James, with that context is, why has Highguard launched into such a toxic state and such a toxic environment?
Excellent question, Tom.
Thank you. That definitely wasn't scripted. That was just off the top of the dome. That's the genius you get.
I think there's a few things that have caused this messy soup to occur. The first thing is, it was like the very last reveal at the Game Awards in the end of 2025, and people were really disappointed with it. They expected something bigger, sexier, more impressive. It was like a lot. Then Jeff Keighley was like accused of having some sort of financial interest in it, and that's why it appeared there. But the story goes that he just saw it, he really liked it. He said to the guys, "Can you get a demo, ready or in the time?" And Jeff just liked it, and that's not in any way proven that Jeff's had any commercial connection to this whatsoever.
Yeah, for the record,
that was alleged. Is certainly there's no connection there. So there was that disappointment at the very end of last year. Then from what I can see, and feel free to correct me, Tom, there was the kind of fact that it just sort of Apex Legends style it, and half the team on this game are Apex Legends people. So this is by design, not coincidence. The game just sort of landed, just hit,
Yeah,
it just came out of nowhere.
It is interesting because it's not even a shadow drop in this case, because you're right in fact that we saw this really big reveal at the Game Awards, which was intended to be this really big hyped up moment, and that happened. And I feel like on the marketing side, it was a case of, right, we'll do this at the Game Awards, and then we're going to go really quiet, let the anticipation build, let the hype build, and then the game's going to come out. But last week I saw articles where people were quite rightly saying, this game is coming out in a week. We've seen one trailer 6-7 weeks ago, and we've seen nothing else. And all of a sudden, now it's out, and there's been no other attempt to tell people what it is, what it's trying to do, what the plan is, what the what the game is. There's been none of that. It was, here's the trailer, and then nothing. I know it's out now, and I think everyone's found that quite confusing a bit. It feels like people have been disarmed a bit, because it's like, well, okay, it's out now, but we still don't really know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, look, better than me, because you work on all our game launches. This is counter to common wisdom, which is that nowadays there's a very long and sophisticated, or usually a very long and sophisticated plan to, based around Steam Next Fest and live events and social media and all kinds of things to kind of reveal a game, and then you kind of put it out there, early access. And obviously games sometimes sit in early access for years, and you're very sort of slowly hone it, you'll grow your community, you're fine-tuning the game until the point where you're kind of ready to launch it. And that's the tried and tested route most people are going to. You're building hype, and also you're just at basic level, you're just ascertaining if there's interest, if people like it, right? And so you're not getting shocked when it launches and people don't like it. And so the third point here, the second point here being the sort of the very quick drop of the game with no hype. The third thing is the fact that it's just had massive players, spiked, and then drop right down. And then you've got this argument going on now almost between other game devs and people in the industry and gamers themselves, where the gamers are like obviously hating on it and review bombing it, I think, to a degree, although review bombing sometimes is a concerted effort for everyone to go, let's all go and give this a bad review. And I can't say for any certainty. It may just be it warrants the bad reviews and people doing it spontaneously. But
it definitely. Sorry, I will let you carry on. I think it definitely. To me, there's definitely shades of
Helldivers 2.
Well, just from to me, I've not played it. To me, some of the reaction I'm seeing definitely feels less about the game. It feels less about Highguard and more of a. We're seeing more and more, I think, where players kind of take this upon themselves to be like, I don't like this. So it's less about the game. It's like, I don't like what's happened here. So I'm going to engage with this in the only way that I can get my voice heard, which, as you said, tends to be these review bombing campaigns. I mean, from reading some critics on this, from seeing issues that players have raised, I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is that it feels very, as a game, it feels very confused about what it's supposed to be. Which I don't think helps.
Fundamentally, that's the third thing I was coming on to, is you've got this kind of war between the developer community saying gamers are cruel and they are treating it unfairly and it's a free-to-play game and they just, gone out in force on it and review bombed it. And then you've got gamers like legitimately going, no, it's just not a good game. We don't like it. And like feeling like they're being gaslit. I saw in that video you shared earlier, like the influencer was talking about it. It's just saying, no, look, you're gaslighting gamers. If gamers have tried something, they don't like it, they don't like it. And so
well, that's a question I've got for you. Is based off a few questions. I think something I'd ask is this the latest example of players who are the audience, whether developers like it or not, that they're the people who they're making these games for? Is this just another example of players turning around and saying, we're tired of kind of being dictated to about what we should be hyped up for? You're not giving us a reason to be excited for this. You've dropped a 2-minute trailer. To me, the Game Awards is realistically, I think, probably the biggest opportunity marketing wise of the events calendar at this point, and you've got the best slot in the entire night, and people have just turned around and it's the point that you've made. People have turned around and their judgment is this didn't warrant the excitement and the hype. And I don't think that Jeff Keighley has helped this. This is one of my other thoughts, was, has that endorsement inadvertently hurt this game because of people kind of saying, again, stop dictating to us what we should or shouldn't be excited for. I think from the way I interpreted those hints and things that were dropping before the Game Awards, I was expecting something tied to a really big IP or a really big studio or just anything that deserves that immediate level of wow. Whereas Highguard just didn't necessarily warrant that because no one had heard of it.
Yeah, look, ultimately it was, I think, a calculated risk to take that approach to marketing. And I'll go back to the fact that half the team Apex Legends, it's not a coincidence that Apex had a sort of similar-ish come from nowhere, drop it really quickly. I think they had a hype event for journalists, and then I think the game appeared.
I think it just came out.
It's a massive calculated risk. I feel that's what they were trying to do. And safer path to take would have been that much longer, kind of 2-3 years in development, early access, tweak it, test it, build your community, build hype, get it out there, and then, and then see. I mean, obviously the whole thing, as well as, people are saying it's, kind of pale imitation of Overwatch 2. People look, fundamentally, people just, if it's an amazing game,
people will play it.
Of all, it isn't a good game by all accounts. Like, I haven't played it. It's just what I've read. The map's too big, characters generic. People just don't actually like it.
There'll always be a vocal minority who will not engage with something, even if the general population say it is quite good. But I think you're on the money there. If this was a really good game, the fact that it's free to play, to me, if there's 100,000 people that are playing it, and we don't know what, obviously we're coming into the weekend now, we don't know what those numbers might look like at the weekend, but if you have 100,000 people playing it at release, and within a few days you've lost 90% of those players,
And they've got
to me that
and they've got no value perception because it's free to play. That's the other problem, right? Like if people buy something, let's take the best example I can think of this is Cyberpunk, right? Cyberpunk, people paid for it. It got massively reviewed, not review bombed. It got bad reviews. It was notoriously buggy and problematic. It launched before it should have. It got terrible reviews on Steam. And that's a game that has effectively, how long has it been out for? I don't know now, like 3 years?
6 years.
6
I'm
years.
sorry
Oh
to
my
say,
God.
Cyberpunk is
God,
6
right.
years old this year.
Right. My whole concept of time, there you go. Shame on me. But that is a game that has just polished and iterated until it's like really good. Yeah. And it's done that. But I think also because people paid for it, they've got a perception of value and they've stuck with it and they want
an
it
investment
to be better.
in it.
Correct. When it's free to play, they don't owe you anything. They're just going to hop in. They might play for far less time than they intended to because it's like, I'll just hop in and have one round and I'll go. Whereas then
if I don't like it immediately, and I've lost nothing,
I'll
so
crap
see you
on
later.
It. Correct.
Yeah.
So I think free to play is great because it's a lowers barrier to entry, but I think it's a double-edged sword because you're also got no value perceptions, I keep saying, and so people will just hop in, play for a very tiny amount of time, make up their minds and say really bad things about it and don't care. They're not invested in it. And that's, probably a key reason.
That's all there is to say, really, isn't there?
No,
it's true.
That's it.
And then there we go. Look at that. We've dissected the entirety of Highguard from reveal to launch. I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Can it recover? Maybe. Of course, we're having this conversation 2 days after it launched, but things don't look good. I mean, my only point really for this is why just make another Titanfall. I'll keep asking for anyone who's ever worked on a Titanfall game, just make another Titanfall.
That
That's what I
burning
want.
floor level in Titanfall 2, the floor keeps changing. You think you're on top of lava and
the greatest single player shooter campaign I've ever played, Titanfall 2. It doesn't need any 3v3 giant maps or anything. Just make a very good campaign.
It's good.
Wrapping up today's lineup, we're once again talking about Ubisoft. We can't seem to escape them at the moment. I know, James, obviously this is your first episode, so you won't have had this wonderful conversation, but Alex can attest to the fact that Ubisoft is the one that keeps coming up. In case you're not aware, last week, Ubisoft announced a really big restructuring program. They're aiming to save about $200 million through cancellations of games, reorganizations of their entire studio network, as well as studio closures. This week, Ubisoft also announced that they are conducting a voluntary redundancy program at their head office in Paris. And in direct response to what happened last week and then this redundancy program, Ubisoft unions are calling for an international strike across Ubisoft's entire global network. So that's Ubisoft. James, do you have any thoughts on this?
It's hard to comment on Ubisoft, right? I mean, obviously, the bigger picture here is it's just symptomatic of the decline of the AAAs, right? Like, we're seeing firsthand, very sadly, people coming to the market who've been working at, the really big publishers because for reasons that are very well established over the last few years with the terrible redundancies. This is just a continuation of the correction that we've seen within the industry. Like, ultimately, I can't really criticize Ubisoft if they need to cut headcount. Look at Embracer, right? Like Embracer were much smaller than Ubisoft, but they had massive restructuring as well. It's just a very unfortunate side effect of the industry. If they'd have said, "Oh, we're getting rid of all these people and replacing them with AI," then there would be I'm not sorry to laugh, but that would cause a great stir. But unfortunately, if there's a need to cut back, there's a need to cut back. It's just an unfortunate reality. It's just so also happens this is in France, and France is notorious for having probably the hardest labor laws, I think, in Europe.
Yeah, when I saw the news about this international strike, my immediate thought was, obviously it's Ubisoft, so this is going to have stemmed from the French side Ubisoft. Obviously, Ubisoft are all across the globe, but for me, my immediate thought was, okay, that's a very realistic threat, because I have every confidence that this is something that these unions will not only call for, but will happily engage in. I think the French have quite deservedly earned their reputation for being, if they're not happy with something, they will raise the banners, to use a medieval term, and raise issue with it. I think one of the real sticking points from what I've read is the return to office mandate, which has become a really big, like I said, a really big sticking point. And I think what's really interesting is, reportedly, and as far as I can tell, this is the case, but we've got to make sure we're being careful. But Ubisoft suspended one of their veteran level designers from the Assassin's Creed series because he openly called them out on LinkedIn and said that this mandate is ridiculous, and we know the real reasons why it's happening, which feels like a very drastic step to take, perhaps. And I don't think this is going to win them any favors. I get the sense that internally there is a lot of strife for obvious reasons, but things like that aren't going to help their own workers who are still there side with them. And I think it raises the question, well, there's this part of this reorganization is moving into these creative houses so they can focus on their best games and their best IP. But if they're just making their workforce more and more disgruntled, how can they possibly get the best out of those people?
Yeah, look, as a business owner myself, I'm not Ubisoft, but you do face situations where you may have to make cuts or redundancies, right? And what you don't want to do is send shockwaves through a company, and basically people think there's a sinking ship. Once you have a sinking ship mentality, then as the phrase goes, rats abandon the sinking ship. So I think it's very difficult. Ubisoft's in a very difficult position because you have to have faith they're doing everything legally and by the book, and they've got a lot of lawyers and HR people advising them to do things scrupulously and correctly, as I'm absolutely sure they are. But when you're dealing with the amount of cuts, and if it's being done in a piecemeal way, or things are coming out over a longer period of time, that's when people get disgruntled and morale drops. If companies can just do it all at once and that's it, it's never nice, but that's ideal. If it trickles out over a period of time and there's endless restructuring and game cancellations, then I understand why people become, disconcerted. Certainly for the employee who criticized the policy on LinkedIn, I just can't comment on it because I haven't seen the full picture, and you don't really know the full story on that. And quite honestly, if someone has signed something saying they won't go onto social media to slag off their employer, and that could be gross misconduct, then that's gross misconduct, right? Like,
yeah, it is a sign though that people aren't happy, isn't it? I do wonder if you'll see more of the, I'd say, veteran talent, to use a word. I wonder if you will see more of those bigger names within Ubisoft who aren't at the executive level turn around and think, okay, well, as you've said, that great analogy of the sinking ship, well, someone else might be interested in what I have to offer.
Yeah,
but I think it'll be interesting to see how things go for Ubisoft. I think, as we're just talking about with Highguard, I think there's some similarities in terms of once people perceive you in a certain way, it's incredibly hard to shake that. And I think for quite a few years now, especially on the players' side, there's been this very established reputation of what Ubisoft is and what it isn't. And that image isn't getting better when people are seeing these kind of things.
But I would say Rainbow Six Siege, still massive, right? Like, huge game. From my own personal experience, I've spent more time than I can care to admit in the Division 2. I mean, I just went back into Division 2 this year and played hours into it. And I'm really, really looking forward to Division 3.
Well, that's why they're focusing on those games, because no one plays all the others. Everyone's playing
Well, obviously, Prince of Persia, the remake got cancelled, and the poor actor yesterday, she went on and put that video, which I don't know if people have seen it, where she found out from her brother. I think that it had been cancelled and she was really upset. So look, as long as it doesn't affect Division 3, I'm
But
not happy with any layoffs.
Get the Division made. That's what we're just.
Yeah, as long as Division 3 is okay.
We don't care about the stock price. I do not care about what the stock's worth. Just get that game made. I
will have the Division 3. I will play that game. I will have that.
I will. Don't give me a PS5 patch for the Division. I want the. I think Division 2 is PS. Oh, is that how old it is?
Yeah, it's Division. Yeah, it's PS4, but I played it on my PS5 because I can. But look, I just want to underscore this on a serious note. It's really sad that the industry is still continuing to lose people. It's not at the volume it was, but this is just, as I said, I'm seeing it as an agency owner. We talk to people, we see where money's flowing and VC funding and everything. And this is just very symptomatic of the post-COVID issues that have been going on for a long time now. And everyone wants it to end and there to be stability. But these things just continue to send shockwaves through the industry, unfortunately. Sorry, that was a bit...
nothing else to add. I think that's a nice place to end it. We'll go away, and then when we come back, we'll try and cheer everyone up with a few jolly stories in the rapid rundown. So we'll see you in a moment. And welcome back to this week's Rapid Rundown. This week, we're going to be taking a look at two stories very quickly, which have popped up in the last few days, both of which I think are quite funny in their own way. The first of which, in direct response to the Highguard situation, is Larian CEO Sven Vinker, who is always popping up to share his thoughts. He, this week, has suggested that maybe video game reviewers should themselves be reviewed in what he described as a Metacritic-style system, where they get a score based on how good their reviews are. I don't know how fair they are. I don't... to me, if we start reviewing the reviewers, are we going to review the people who are reviewing the reviewers?
Who watches the watchers?
Where does it end? Exactly.
Yeah, it's a weird side comment that's not going to go anywhere. I think it was Jeff Gerstmann who came back with a very pithy response to that.
I believe, yes.
If anyone cares to look it up, you can look up Jeff Gerstmann's response to that. But yeah, I mean, obviously...
For the record, all the stories we discussed, they'll be linked below. I believe the article that we're discussing here does have Jeff's response. If it doesn't, I will go and find it because it is quite pithy.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting suggestion to review reviewers, but I've been in this industry 30 years and you have reviewers and you respect them and you trust their opinion, and people are always going to hate on critics, right? Like, that's just the way it goes.
I've gone on and Jeff's comment was this. I will not include any not appropriate language, but this is what Jeff said in response. Jeff said, try a couple of decades of emails ranging from simple insults all the way up to death threats from idiot fanboys who can't handle you giving a game only an 8 out of 10, and see which one puts more calluses on your soul. You'll fold in 6 months or less. Which, I must say, as someone who did used to review video games on a very small scale, I think journalists get enough trouble from players that we don't need to be observing them and checking them on their opinions. I think, of course, sometimes some people will go too far in criticism, but I think in 99.9% of cases, a reviewer is never out for the blood of a developer or a publisher. Reviews are opinions. You don't have to like them, but yeah, I think this is a bit of a silly suggestion. In other news, something which I do think is fantastic is this story I saw last night, which was a developer of a horror game. I can't quite recall the name, but someone's working on a new horror game, and they basically posted on X and said, if you like this tweet, I will add you to the credits of the game. I think their logic was, maybe like a few people will like it, and we'll have some funny credits. The post went so viral, they had over 60,000 likes, and the end credit sequence of that game is now a 30-minute sequence, which we work in PR, we work in marketing. I think this is one of the most brilliant marketing things I've seen in such a long time, and I think it's so inadvertent that it's just brilliant. It really is fantastic.
I can't but violently agree with you. It's just a little bit of PR marketing genius that those of us in the industry wish we'd have had or suggested an idea like that. And it's just like, obviously it caught on. So props to the developer for doing that. And anyone who actually sits through the credit sequence and reads every name gets even more respect from me.
But yeah, 100%. The game in question, Twilight Moonflower, and this was a quote from the developer to just finish the episode. I think this is great. To get even a little bit of recognition for my game, I made a promise to include everyone who liked it in the ending credits, and as a result, over 60,000 people gathered. But I managed to include seemingly every single one of them through sheer willpower, which took me over 300 hours, which I admire someone who keeps a promise. And you know, like we've said, this is thousands of people will have heard of this game now that won't have heard of it other ways. But now I'm sure we're going to see all the copycats who do the same thing to much lesser effect. And within a month or so, it will be the new viral trend will be adding everyone to your credits, and then eventually
the question
people will
is,
grow
Tom,
tired.
Did that convert to sales? Did that convert?
It's a good question. We'll have to go away and do the research and find out.
Yeah, now you're making me want to go away and look at the data to actually see what the uplift was from doing that, because it's great.
We'll go and find out.
But it's got to convert
for now, we'll just leave it as like a feel-good story, because if no one bought it, then it's not worked. But hey, people have heard of it. But that's a wrap. That's a wrap for this week for the Rapid Rundown today. Thank you for tuning in, as always, to this episode of the Weekly Download. James, thank you, of course, for joining us and for making your debut. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening, if you're watching on YouTube, like I said, be sure to subscribe to stay in the loop. If you'd rather read your news, that's totally fine too. Be sure to subscribe to the Weekly Download newsletter on LinkedIn. And if you're saying, Tom, I want even more stories, I want it more than weekly, well, we've got you sorted there too, because we've got the biggest industry stories delivered to your inbox Monday to Friday via the daily download, which you can also find linked in the description. And that is, as someone who authors it myself, trust me, it's very good. It's really good. It's well worth. It's very informative.
Top notch.
Very informative. Top notch. But that's all for us this week. We'll be back next time with more stories and trends. Thank you to James again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.